Hey friends, happy Halloween. I'm Pragmatik and I like to talk about video games. And maybe a few years ago you guys remember me talking about Clocktower 3, the game that, at the time, was so scary I had to stop playing it. Well, I wanted to see if the original Clocktower, at least in the US, has that same type of scare factor. Clocktower was developed by Human Entertainment and published in 1997 by ASCII, though making the first installment for a US audience. This is technically the second game, following a game by the name of Clocktower: The First Fear, that was developed on the Super Famicom in Japan. While Clocktower is a sequel, the game tries to sum up what happened in the original well enough, condensing the story to there being a previous attack from a person known as the Scissorman, and now following the sole survivor a short while later.
What on earth are you doing, Professor? You mustn't hypnotize her like this. She's not ready to remember the murders yet.
Like its Japanese predecessor, the game uses a point-and-click format, with multiple characters interacting with several objects as they try to figure out the truth of the Barrows family and the murders that coincide with the family name. A lot of the story events are determined by just what decisions the player makes, and what certain things they interact with. This determines such events like which characters will be played, the scenarios they enter, and even the endings they obtain, of which there are 10. These endings are halved between two pivotal characters: Jennifer, the original survivor of Clocktower: The First Fear, and Helen, Jennifer's caretaker and someone who acts more like a sister than a parental guardian. Which character you play as is determined by how many times you talk to a certain character, and from here, the playthrough is set forth, though this isn't really a hidden fact, as hints are scattered throughout each scenario, and this fact is literally in the first room. And this is something I really like about the game. While you do control multiple characters, you always start out as the psychiatrist Samuel Barton. He only serves to choose the main character for the story and acts as kind of a tutorial for the game. He shows the player just how to interact with items and characters, leading the player in before they are subjected to the suspenseful segments of Clocktower. And this is where I feel Clocktower really takes off in terms of gameplay. For a game made in 1997, I think Clocktower was way ahead of its time. And that's saying something for as basic as a point-and-click game. Sometimes the pacing of a point-and-click game can feel a little sluggish, but I can confidently say that I've never once felt that with Clocktower, which is good because quick decisions and a panicked pace is just what Clocktower is going for. The Scissorman scenario are a mix of trying to find items to get through the scenario, and the act of escaping Scissorman himself, both of which are pretty great, because you never know when the situation will shift. Clocktower does a great job of hiding the Scissorman in various areas, making him pop out when you're knee-deep in looking for the clues. This is something that adds to the tension as well as being just a little annoying, but in a good way. If Scissorman was restricted to just segments, then I feel a lot of the suspense and panic would be a little mitigated, dampening the experience. Clocktower's way of keeping you on your toes is how the game should be done. That said, there is a bit of trial and error when it comes to evading the scenarios. There are times that making the wrong decisions can get you locked into a dead end. Usually continuing from a death means restarting at a room you just entered, and if it's a bad room then you may find yourself needing to start from the last save, which could be a pretty big loss of progress depending on how often you save. But more often than not, losing Scissorman in one way or another works multiple times, and there are usually items that can stun Scissorman to free up some space between you two. The game itself isn't very long, only spanning about 3 or 4 hours between characters and an ending, but the different paths you can take and even players you can use during the playthrough makes for an absolute ton of replayability. And this is one of the few games where getting different endings is encouraged and won't see you losing days of playtime. It's even worth it to go back and see if there are any other ways to avoid Scissorman, because they range from being really interesting to borderline hilarious, which makes sense because look at this guy. My hat's off to making this 3-foot-nothing child wielding a pair of topiary shears feel as threatening as he does. He seems like his biggest weakness is a brisk walking speed, but then suddenly this dude does backflips off a second-story ledge, sending you back to running for your life. And that's a big part of the mystery itself. In-game dialogue shows that people wonder if this guy is a mimic or even just some guy trying to cash in on the Barrow murders hype. But what you're up against shows this person taking shots, overpowering full-grown people, and just showing the player that he is a force to be reckoned with, leading that he might be something more supernatural. I'm sure you've totally found yourself sizing up a killer from a movie, wondering if you can take him. With Scissorman, I don't know, man. He seems to know his craft and has moves like an Olympic gymnast, so I don't think I'd want to mess with him. Sadly, the biggest flaw this game has for me is its visual style. For a game made in 1997, there is a lot to praise, from voice-acted characters to a lot of animations between each character and the items they interact with. This is a game done well, but I feel the overall look of the game hasn't aged very well. While there isn't anything bad about how it looks, I feel when comparing it to the original Famicom Clocktower, that art style had a lot more going for it. Sprite animations and background scenery that really painted a picture of where you were. Clocktower for the PS1 still conveys scenery very well, but I don't think it shines as brightly as the Famicom did. The hype for 3D visuals was at an all-time high at this point in time, and I can feel that Clocktower definitely chose this style solely for this reason. Seeing a game done in that same style as the Famicom would have looked amazing, and while I'm sure this game did too at the time, it's definitely taken a hit in quality as the years have went on. But maybe people like this look of the game, and I wouldn't fault them for that. PS1 horror graphics are making a huge comeback, and if that's your style, then I definitely recommend checking out Clocktower if you haven't before. This was a new experience for me as well, and with how much time has passed, I think this is still a game that is worth a lot of praise, and for a lot of reasons. While I personally don't think the visual style is the best, I will say one thing Clocktower does perfectly is its audio. I love crediting audio when I can in a game, and oddly enough, it's the lack of music in this game that is a plus for me. This isn't to say there isn't music, but when the music does play, it's craftily selected for scenes with the Scissorman. Usually when things are calmer, you're presented with a lot more ambient noise. Being in the office at the beginning gives you the atmosphere of printers printing out document after document, the low hum of electronics, and the dull chatter of work colleagues as they pass through the day. The police station is also met with chatter between officers, and the library has a much duller tone. Even when viewing the overworld map, you're greeted with the sound of passing cars and wind through the air. I love this idea that music isn't needed until it's called for. That until the Scissorman appears, daily life just sounds like daily life. Speaking of which, the Scissorman theme itself, I feel, is on the same level as the theme from the Famicom version, which is saying a lot. I love how tense that theme sounds in the original, and I think it has a lot of the same feeling. Give it a listen. Giving the Scissorman a theme like this is imperative and really shows that this scene is important, that this character is a threat. In terms of audio design, Clocktower is leagues above other horror games in my opinion. Each character feels like a well-written individual. Barton is kind of pompous, then you have Nolan, who has a sincere concern for Jennifer, and the wisecracking Stan Gotts, who is devoted to cracking the case, and shows his true colors as a believer when he himself gets attacked by the Scissorman. But as good as these characters are, I don't think any of them compare to just how interesting Scissorman is. And that's pretty impressive given a character that has no dialogue. For a game as old as it is, Clocktower really holds up. And I think I'll end the video here with one of my favorite elements of the game, the Scissorman himself. I can't get over how great of a character Scissorman is, and it's just these little scenarios you find yourself in that really makes me love this game. Like here is this man-child hybrid wielding a great big pair of scissors that only the power of a bed comforter seems to be enough to overpower. I also love that despite having a whole room to explore, you can hide on this top bunk here and Scissorman will be all, "Oh, okay." It's amazing to me how you can make such a seemingly simple character with a weapon that is equal parts scary as it is ridiculous, and just make him so silly yet cool at the same time. The fact that he brings so much tension in any situation you're put in with him is a success in my book. He's a character that stands out with the rest of the characters, and I feel that's saying something with how interesting every character is, and I believe he deserves a place amongst the best of the best when it comes to iconic horror genre baddies. Clocktower cements itself as a classic horror masterpiece that surely, I feel, needs a resurgence into the modern day gaming scene. I feel there is much more you can do with the Clocktower series, with just how captivating the story, characters, and atmosphere can be. But even if it never sees the light of day again, we at least have 3 installments that steal themselves forever in the history of the horror genre. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for checking out my Clocktower video. If you like what you saw, leave a like and consider subscribing if you're new. Have a happy Halloween, stay safe, and keep it practical.